Alright guys, so we're gonna get started. So a couple of quick housekeeping things. So welcome to PJ and I's home. Thank you for coming out to the Conference on the Couch. This is one of my favorite parts of the festival. It was really wonderful last year and I'm excited to be doing it again. There is food, there's coffee in the kitchen. Feel free to grab some at any time. Bathrooms are over here. Feel free to use it at any time. If you want, you can go through that door and down the hallway if you don't want to kind of walk through here. Also, we have Wi-Fi. It's any of the beans, so lima bean, pinto bean, and then also outhouse. And the password is Bucket McBeans, so Bucket MC Beans for anyone who wants to get on Wi-Fi.
Was that a cat?
That is my cat. Yes.
You know, that's always it.
So this is the first Conference on the Couch, Bodies of Work. I'm very excited for our esteemed panel that we have here today, who will introduce themselves in a second. But just to say really quickly, for people who haven't been here before, the idea of doing the Conference on the Couch was really to play with the traditional conference format where you have people on the stage and then the audience is over here and it feels very separate and sterile. We wanted to make it feel more family and more salon style, like back in the days of Virtue Stein and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's about like having more of a conversation with one another and getting to know each other than talking at each other kind of thing. So what will happen is our panel, moderated by Evan Garza from Blanton, will chat for 30 minutes or so, however long it goes, and then we'll kind of open it up to the room and continue the conversation from there. So if you want to take it away, Evan.
Sure, yeah. I'm Evan Garza. I'm the Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary at the Blanton. I'm a Texas native, so I'm super thrilled to be here doing this. I think what would be really helpful is if when everyone introduces themselves, if it's totally up to you, but if you prefer to share what pronouns you would prefer us to use, then I think that would be really helpful for the group. You can use he or she with me. So who should start? Who would like to go?
I'll go.
Okay.
I'm Shannon O'Malley. I came in from the San Francisco Bay Area to live in Oakland. And I made this book with Keith Wilson called Gay Men Draw Vaginas. It's a book of vagina drawings. And I'm really jazzed to have been asked to come to the festival and talk about the book and its context in the grander world of vaginas and everything else. Oh, and you can call me a she. It's fine.
I guess I should. Oh man, I don't know. This couch is hard to stand on. I'm just gonna lean forward. I'm Drew Riley. She, her, please. I'm actually born and raised local Austinite, a trans woman artist who specifically paints and interviews gender diverse people and releases the stories and the paintings next to each other in a project called Gender Portraits.
My name is Beth Consetta Rubel, and I'm an Austin native. He, she, her is fine, and I am currently working on the paper bag test series, which focuses on cultural identity and the historical test of the paper bag, where they I'm so sorry, I'm so nervous. I'm doing a series based on this, the history of the paper bag test, which was a thing they actually utilized, where they would take a paper bag and place it next to your skin color. If you were darker than the bag, you weren't admitted into that college, event, party, etc., etc.
Yep.
So yeah, so it's an actual thing. It happened up into the 80s. My series focuses on colorism, cultural identity. That's all.
Sorry, I'm still getting over
Sorry.
the paper bag. What? My name is Alyssa Taylor Wendt. She, her is fine. I'm a local, now Austin-based filmmaker and artist. I do multimedia work, primarily performance, video, sound installations, photography, sculpture, just crazy ass shit. I don't know. I'm from New York. I've lived here for about 4 years. And I just finished my first experimental feature film called Haint. And I just had a show, Women in Their Work Gallery, called Compartments of Desire. That was multimedia show that was a lot about desire, sexuality, gender, power, identity, and healing, and shamanism. Yeah. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to come.
Hey everybody, my name is Bug. I use preferred them, they, theirs, but I get all of the pronouns and just doesn't really bother me to say hey. Or hey. I make moving image work mainly, but that often stops or gets alive in a room as well. I'm really happy we're all here. I'm also on the board of Outsiders, so it's making me very excited that we're off and running.
My name is Keith Wilson. I co-created this book with Shannon. I prefer he, him. And I am from San Francisco. I live in San Francisco, but I went to school here. And I got my MFA in RTF department here. So I'm familiar with Austin and many of you. I am a filmmaker and a photographer, and I'll be doing a performance later in the festival, so I do many things as well. And it's good to be here. Yeah.
Great. So I think what I wanted to start with is, this conversation is called Bodies of Work, and in the work that I've been doing at the Blanton, specifically recently in an exhibition called Come As You Are, Art of the 1990s, I've been thinking a lot about the body and the political nature of the body. There was this period of art making in the late 80s and early 90s that was spurred in large part by queer artist collectives like Grand Fury and Fierce Pussy, and to some extent Canadian collectives like General Idea, who were making work that really put the body up front. And that was a very political thing to do in the late 80s, and during the Reagan administration and during the AIDS crisis, the body was a very political place. And I think what's been fascinating for me to realize, or maybe even somewhat crazy, is that the body is still a very political place. It's still a very charged, very charged place, as opposed to something that we all have access to. And I think there have been a lot of recent conversations in queer art making circles and among queer artists, and even among hetero artists, about the political nature of the body. So the question that I wanted to start with, of the prompts that we emailed about before, I wanted to talk about the body relating to queerness and sexuality and identity and gender. So my question for the group is, and the other thing that I want to say before we get started is that I would really love for this to be as much of a conversation as possible, so I have no intention of speaking at anyone. I really very much want this to be a conversation, so please jump in and feel free to pick up where someone else left off. Is queerness, or are queerness, identity, sexuality, and or gender defined by or confined to our bodies? And why or why not? And I think, I certainly don't want to kick off the conversation, so if anyone wants to start, by all means. But I think as queer people, I think on some fundamental level we are defined by who we identify as and who we want to love and fuck. And so on some level that immediately brings the body into the conversation. I guess the question that I'm asking is, to what degree do our bodies define who we are, either as queer people or as genderqueer people or trans-identifying people? How does the body limit those notions or that dialogue?
I'd love to start. I mean, I definitely think that, you mentioned genderqueer people and trans people, like, that's a very easy thing to talk about, to definitely prove that our bodies both confine us and don't. That, like, it's something that definitely shapes our definitions, because I think that trans and other gender diverse people have to fight very, very hard to be seen, against what people want to label them because of their bodies. And I know that there's a lot of people who don't feel as valid in queer spaces, myself included sometimes, because as a trans woman who also identifies as a lesbian, it's very hard for me to claim that identity, because there's a lot of people who wouldn't see me that way, or because they wouldn't be attracted to me, they think that they can erase my label. And I know it was even a hard thing for me to identify with myself, and it was it's a journey I think I'm still on. So I think that I don't think our bodies have to confine us in the absolute sense, but they definitely direct us, and it's something that we have to include in our definition, and it's definitely something that makes it, I guess, difficult for people like me. Because I think that, especially in queer spaces, people are celebrating, just like you said, it's so much about you is what you're attracted to. So there's so much celebration of that when someone comes in with a different body, it feels like someone's trying to shut down your party rather than expand it.
Shut down your party.
Nobody wants their party shut down.
No.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think that I feel like our bodies are a guide, a little bit of a map that we can sort of take on whatever journey we want to with that. And I think often the obstacles that we run into come from reflections from others, and the way people treat us one way or another because of how we where we come from with our bodies. But I think that those obstacles and confinements definitely come from the outside world and not so much from within ourselves. And I think when we feel less comfortable, it's because we're, sensitive to, how we are going through the world. But I think coming from within, people have a lot of freedom with their bodies, and there is no confinement from the inside out. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes it so important to see images of bodies where the embodied meanings are unconventional, or we haven't seen them before. Like last night, I'm so sorry I forget the name of the artist, the one who did the Grace Jones thing.
Maxi Rad.
Yeah, there were so many there are body parts there, right, that were we could read them conventionally, but because of the way the artist was moving and through costume and everything else that was great about that, we were asked to read the physical in very unconventional ways. And so it's the more we see those representations of our body parts in weird queero ways, the better, because then we're kind of forcing the outside world to also see these pieces, that are hard to change in different ways, instead of us changing. I have this conversation with Keith a lot when we were doing our project, about what do these vaginas mean? Why do people get so angry about the way that they're represented? And it's if people they're connected to these physical representations so much, and they're mad that the pieces have been infused with certain meanings. But we can change those. Can we change those?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought that it was a good link to one of the other questions, which was, and also, how does gender or sexuality sit outside of the body? And I think the link between that and this is language, of course, which is what I'm using right now to try to say that, one of the terrible, shitty parts of, I think, being queer, or especially trans, is that people immediately are like, what's going on down there? We want to know. What are you doing?
That happened to me just last week in the Social Security office. I was asked point blank about my
blank
by the clerk who's supposed to be helping me.
That's crazy.
And then they had a conversation of four employees together, and I could hear them back there talking about me in
Yeah.
surgeries and
It happened on my
Yeah.
review board. I mean, it's
No shit.
yeah, it's amazing how that, and then the space is just like that's what we feel comfortable talking about. So, this is great for me because it includes this queer magic, I guess. That is.
And when you say
thought
this,
of
you
with
mean
the-
Gay Men Draw Vagina?
Yes, sorry, or even just visual art because it allows for a place for the expression to sit outside of the body that then maybe can answer those questions for people or address them in a different way. So,
Yeah, why do you... I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Or abstract them. I mean, that's why I
Right.
think artists are so important, is to abstract these very limited definitions of the body and of gender, and we sort of explode it for people that don't have the ability to look outside of a very constricted presentation of sexuality. So the role of artists and musicians and performers is really essential for that.
Yeah, that was my next question, is how important is it for representations of different bodies to be present in a larger image-based culture?
so important. It's like the most important thing ever. I mean, actually, I know that the whole reason I do the project I do is like, I was actually very vulnerable and nervous about painting myself as a trans person, because at the time I was still closeted in about half of my life, like at work, in most of my family, and then working on a painting of myself as a trans person, it was weird, even though I was the person painting it, seeing it, like, it was so validating, like, and it's so emotional, and I realized how important it would have been if I had seen things like that growing up, and I actually really liked when I was looking at the Gay Men Draw Vaginas book, is there was I saw at least 3 or 4 representations that looked like men with vaginas, or maybe a vagina that had been on testosterone or something like that, or maybe an intersex vagina. I wasn't, there was no caption, but I was actually specifically looking for that to see if a lot of the people that I know were represented, and because too often we're not, we're just left out.
Is gender a home or a trap?
God, it's so early.
Get that coffee going.
This is like a 2 a.m. fucking question, you know?
Is it a
We
home
should
or
have had
trap?
an open bar. We should have had a bar. I know it's a really loaded question, but it's something that I think about a lot, because I think there is this. I mean, it's very, because of the dominant, obstructive nature of heterosexual culture. There is an expectation that you are supposed to do one thing or another. You're supposed to participate in a binary, and you're either one thing or this other thing. And I think, because of conversations that we have had as a larger queer community, and in the last decade or two as a global queer community, we've allowed ourselves to have a conversation about how important it is that we lop ourselves into one category or another. And I think that the more progress that we make, and the more representation of variation of gender identities that exist, the more that we are able to refuse to categorize each of those things. But I think even as we enter a new queer culture where gender queer bodies, gender fluid bodies, trans identifying persons, the more that we acknowledge those additional identities, I think the more identities we are there creating, the more gender identities, I guess, exist. And so I guess my question is, how significant is it, or is it important at all?
Yeah.
To make gender a factor in one's identity.
I just latched on to the word home that you used, because
Mm-hmm.
I think I think you meant it as like, oh, it's like this safe place or whatever, or it's my go-to. But that word home has a lot of other meanings too. It like, everyone maybe has something they call a home, but it's all different for everybody. And my home isn't necessarily that safe place.
Sure.
I mean, me as just a
Sure.
person. It's a place where I fell down and my parents beat me, or I burned my hand cooking, or whatever. And it's the home isn't necessarily that safe space,
Right.
but it is that thing that oh God, I know that thing again.
Yeah.
Or it's like, oh, I'll just go home and wear my sweats and veg out and watch TV or whatever. It's not that thing that I'm just so fucking excited about and like, can't wait to get home. It's the best thing ever. Like. So that word, like, it's like really, it's like really in my brain, and I'm trying to connect it. Like, okay, like, is my woman's body, in the way that people read me and my body parts in the world, is that warm and fuzzy and comfortable to me? Like, no, it is a trap also, but it also is home. I mean, to me, the obvious answer is that it's both. But I want to think about that more. Is it home for me? Like. Yeah, it is, but like sometimes it's just like.
Yeah, I wanted to
God,
choose
fuck
that word on purpose because it's totally loaded.
It's making me think of like nostalgia. So if we have like a cultural nostalgia around gender, which is like a longing for home, then we are all being like longing for the comfort of feeling at home within a cultural gender place. Which may or may not be achievable depending on many factors. And I think for me, and something in there too in the question made me think a lot about self-authorship. So within representation, I really think self-authorship has become very important. And I just wanted to throw that in there. But the idea of coming home, being sort of impossible for many, maybe really all, but I can't say that because I think it is important too that if you're coming from one end of a spectrum that is a binary spectrum too, part of respecting that spectrum is understanding that there are points that are achievable and that exist, and so in that way someone could have like home on the poles, and then in between is like nostalgia.
Well,
I just want to go off what you were saying about self-authorship and choice. And so when I read that question, I think the word home, I immediately thought I replaced, or I just tried to think of the question and replace the word gender with family, right? So is family a home or a trap? And so for myself and most people I know, started out as a trap and became a home because maybe you didn't fit in with the family you came with, and so you made a chosen family of people that understood and loved you for who you really are and not what you're supposed to be.
And I think the notion of self-authorship totally has to do with family, because as queer people, we ultimately decide who our family is, whether that's our bio family or our queer family.
Right.
So that notion of self-authorship is totally part of that.
So going from that, the gender question could be just sort of inserted in that, where it maybe was started off as a trap, and then when you choose the place where you feel comfortable and you feel like yourself, it can become a home in that same way that these different definitions of family.
And I would even extend that to kind of what both of you were saying, because you're talking about like in authorship. You are kind of making points for people who can't identify with it to navigate, and you were talking about like the definitions of gender, and if like we're just sticking to this binary. And I do think that the definitions of gender we have right now as a culture are a trap, and it actually comes up in a lot of conversations about trans issues where people misunderstand what the trans community is doing and sees it as an extension of patriarchy or like this oppression system or this, and they're not realizing that the people who are saying the stories they're reading are trying to redefine the words, and they're using old definitions when they're reading these stories, and so like I think right now our words about gender are a trap, and actually that's one of the reasons why trans people don't fit as much into the queer spaces, is because we have the words heterosexual, homosexual, yay, there's pansexual for people who go all like the way around, or bisexual, but like for somebody who's attracted to trans men who haven't had genital surgery, what's the word for that? You know, if they're a man, or what if they're a trans man? Like, we have like such limited words for our attractions around gender, which I think causes some of that conflict of like, how do I respond to this because my word means something different than your word? And so changing those definitions, like you were saying, brings it back into a home.
What do our bodies say about present day culture? They don't have to say anything.
They say something about technology.
How so?
Like, I'm not a historian of this topic, but, you know, a trans person was called something different 300 years ago, depending on what culture that person was living in. And there, as far as I know, was no safe way to alter the body to look away a person wanted to look, or inhabit a body the person wanted to inhabit. But now, you know, I don't know, this is like a lay person talking about this topic, you know, like, I don't know, the costs have gone down to change bodies. You know, cultures, we're all about technology. I mean, I live in the Bay Area, so everyone's just constantly talking about disruption and innovation and like health sciences and apps and all this stuff. So. Yeah, it's definitely, you know, technology is like fed into that, you know, in a way that it never did in, you know, 1120 in France, or, you know.
I think the language is, I mean, even in the last 10 or 15 years, it's totally different.
Even in the last 2 or 3.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, but to follow up on that comment, though, I think, I mean, I guess what I mean is, like, in the broader context of our bodies, so not just what we are physically or surgically able to do to our bodies, because, I mean, let's be real. I mean, trans identifying folks don't. A surgery does not necessitate one's identity.
Right.
Yes.
And so that's totally a personal decision that someone gets to make based on their needs, their desires, their identity, etc. But however they present their body is completely, is totally up to them. But I guess the reason that I wanted to introduce this question is because I wanted to try to contextualize bodies within this larger, and especially now, very image-based culture, where what we experience by and large are images of other people rather than actual physical interactions with other bodies. And so I know that it was a like total corny question and not at all, you know, very detailed thought. But I guess I just wanted to try and contextualize bodies within this larger, you know, within this larger culture that exists now, and what their place is, or if there is a place for it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Gosh.
We should have had a bar.
I mean, that question sort of brings out, as an artist, like the prankster in me. You know, like I'm much more interested in presenting the body in such a way, and I think that's why performance and you know, like live work and again, like self-authorship, but I think there's something else that I'm trying to think, a presence that's important, instead of mediation of the image. I don't think I'm getting to what I'm trying to say, but there seems like a lot of space for reversing the the assumption around bodies. I mean, I know that as a person that takes up like space that would be assigned to either gender on sort of a daily basis, I feel like a prankster a lot, you know, which I don't do anything. I'm just taking a piss, or, you know, I did or didn't shave, and I'm using my voice in a, you know, it's honestly like, I'm just going to the grocery store, and I've become a prankster, which I'm pretty comfortable with, but it's tiring, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's an answer to
No,
your
it's
question,
totally an answer.
but I think that's where my mind went in that way.
Mhm.
And I think I can take the opportunity to use that to up the level of the prank, or, you know, or it can be a real downer.
Something I'm thinking about is that, you know, if the way that we communicate and if the visual and the image-based is a language that we're now conversing in, doesn't it erase that continuum in so many ways? Because an image is often needs to be like summed up with little context, but if I see it, I need, you know, like an effective image is one that communicates right away what it is. And what it is so malleable and so slimming. It almost, I almost want it as a viewer. I want to, you know, I don't have a lot of time. What are you trying to tell me? Where on this, this whatever continuum does it fit? It's without text or language or conversation. I almost want it to be easier for me to sort of to place, to understand. And that's me also coming from a white male cisgendered body that often, you know, like, what am I trying to say? I guess I kind of get frustrated by the sort of work I have to do over images. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And some people want to do no work.
Yeah, and sometimes I want to do no work.
They see this, and maybe they see this, and if there's nothing in that image that they can identify,
The symbols
they
or-
start
yeah.
looking at other things. It's
Yeah.
uninterpretable to them. They get angry, they get frustrated, or they don't care and they walk away.
Exactly. Like sometimes I just want a logo. I know what it is. You know, I know what it is. I've seen it before. There's been a brand impression on me before. I've seen that. I know what you're trying to tell
I mean,
me.
that's why we have the rainbow flag, right? And like
Exactly.
the, you know, the trans flag and all those things, is so that we
Exactly.
can wear a badge and someone can quickly identify
Right.
something.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I put on makeup in the way I do, is so that someone
Exactly.
can look at me and see feminine, because I can feel as feminine as I want to, but you know that person doesn't know it, and and unfortunately that's like you only have so many tools in the visual medium.
Exactly. It is a 2D. It has no smells. It has no sounds. It is a two-dimensional thing.
I think it's interesting, the whole idea of perception and how one identifies, because I'm pretty much relating this whole conversation towards my cultural identity. I'm biracial, but I identify as black, and so I get a lot of like side eyes or head turns because I do have light skin privilege and I have a white parent, and so I know that this is about gender, but I guess coming from someone who's racially ambiguous, I think from my perspective, it's very normal, but I feel like, I think the thing that fuels my art the most is trying to figure out, is it human nature to look at someone and just want to make that quick decision, that easy categorization, you're this? And I mean, is that just human nature, or are we trained that way? Like what, I mean, because to me, that was not normal for me. Like I can, I look at someone, I'm like, oh, they're mixed, whatever. I mean,
Right.
I don't need to know,
Right.
so that's just kind of where my head is at. with
Yeah,
whole identity
as
perspective.
artists and individuals, do you find that that there's a level of frustration when it comes to ambiguity?
From people or from us? Or I guess my answer is yes, from other people. I love ambiguity, but then I find
Right.
so many people who are like, but what does this
They
mean?
can't
Or but
handle
like
it.
which way is it? But like
I
but
need to know.
yeah, or like if I have
Yeah.
a piece that not even related to gender or like bodies or any of those things, like if I'm mixing messages where this is portraying confidence and weakness, people will ask me, is it confidence or weakness? Like they want to know.
They want a category.
Yeah.
You know, it's people digest things a lot more easily in categorization. And I try to resist that myself, but as you were saying, you know, you just want a logo sometimes. Sometimes you just
Yeah.
want something that's, you know, easy to understand where you don't feel ambiguous about something. And one thing I was thinking of when I read that question, you know, just how our bodies and the culture sort of speak to each other, is that I think right now there's a lot of information and technology, as you were saying, which is power in a way, right? Because we share this information, so we have a lot more knowledge about bodies. Diversity, like things are getting more diverse, maybe not as fast as sometimes we want it to be. But, you know, so our bodies reflect that in our diversity, and also in our, you know, decoration, the way we choose to present ourselves as this image-conscious culture, right? So I don't know if that reflects more self-awareness or vanity or superficiality or more layers of truth, because, right, an image can be manipulated. So what is an image really? It's not even maybe a representation, right? It could be an altered representation, and it could be done in an artistic way for positive things. It could be, you know, advertising, airbrushing someone so they look like some inhuman, impossible thing, you know, I mean, so there's a lot of layers to that, but I think our bodies are definitely reflecting the state of our culture, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, like, if I could tie it back to the Gay Men Draw Vaginas project, like, that to me is a lot of, like, you know, we're talking a lot about how these visual things can be interpreted so many different ways and how people want to assign one thing to it even though it can embody a lot of things. And, like, I think that's one of the issues with the controversy surrounding the work, is because when I looked through it, I really liked that there was very little direction in how I should feel. Like there was no title or description for why something was drawn the way it was or who drew it. There was very simple chapter sections that just kind of like loosely summed it up, and there's a lot of different narratives throughout it. As you kept going, you felt different ways. And I think that one of the things is there were things that were like a little startling or a little offensive, but I saw that as an invitation for conversation and a story about how all these things exist in our society. Like the book is called Gay Men Draw Vaginas, not just vaginas, and so this is about gay men's relationships to vaginas. And so like, but I think that a lot of times, you know, someone maybe would see that and they would only identify with the offense, and they would think that maybe the whole series or the whole whatever, or just this piece is only about the offense, and they lose the rest of that narrative. And I think that that's something that I took away from it. But also, once again, someone else may feel entirely different about that project, because that's what I look at it and identify it as,
Sure.
you know, in that larger sense.
And one of the reasons why we chose to not put an image on the cover is because because there's so many different types of images in here that range from the celebratory and the beautiful to the misogynistic, and we didn't know what to put on here, and by putting one image, it meant that image was going to sum up this whole thing.
Or that we had a point of view to begin with.
Exactly, or that we had a point of view. And we just, this is all it is. You know, there's a lot of things in here.
Yeah.
But going back to the logo thing that you were talking about, sometimes I just want a logo, and you know, you mentioned like, oh, I do see the cliches in there, you know, but then I also see a lot of other shit in there that, you know, it's like you could have never imagined, like what the fuck is that? that propensity for many people, you know, and I'm including myself, you know, to want, like, I want the logo. I just want the easy thing. Like, what is that? I understand it. I get it. Okay, next. It makes me feel comfortable. Like, yes, I understand that. I'm a person who can interpret an image. Like, the book is full of those things. There's so many, like, stupid fucking dentata. Like, so many dudes were like, I'm gonna put teeth in it. You know, like, they just thought that was so fucking clever. And we're like, okay, yeah, do your fucking teeth, you know, whatever. Do your little, you know, what is it, that
Venus.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
thing, you know, whatever. And like a lot of people who like the book, they got it because it has those fucking teeth. They're like, that's what I want. I want the logo. I want the teeth. It's full of all the fucking teeth and the Venus flytraps and like that's just what they needed. They needed that like, I'm comfortable. That's what it is. That's funny. Haha. I don't care that it's misogynist. I didn't even think that way. You know, whatever. But then like, those people's affinity for the project actually funded the whole fucking thing. So that there could be this other conversation.
Right.
So the rest of the book could have all these other what the fuck images, you know? Like somebody drew like a lamp. A genie lamp or something, like it's like in a park. It's like so. It's like what
it's
is
by
this?
a stop sign.
Yeah,
There's
like
a park bench,
What?
a canyon, sort of. It's very.
This makes me think, so like the labor of looking, like the thing that
Labor
you're
of
saying,
looking.
sometimes I just don't want to do it. Sometimes I just want the sign, the thing,
Yeah.
to the logo. And the relationship of that to ambiguity, that people feel uncomfortable, you know, so like, that interests me, you know, the idea that we're, you know, that this is hard work. This image is giving me a lot of signals. And there's, you know, the world is getting more diverse, and I'm looking at all these people, you know. I don't know why I'm getting sort of. But like, I'm interested in the relationship between that labor of looking and the reaction to ambiguity of the presence of bodies culturally,
Yeah.
and how then back to self-authorship. It's not an answer or anything. It's
It's a match.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was.
I also felt like, you know, you're talking about that cliche of like, you know, this idea that like gay men are going to be so horrified or they don't understand vaginas so much that they're going to draw them as monsters and stuff like that. Like, I took that being in the book as like a part of that narrative of like gay men's relationships and maybe what people expect. Like the fact that people were funding it because of that, getting excited about the campiness of it, I think is part of that conversation. And then I think that when you get there and there's such a bigger thing, it's going to force some of those people to look at it. Whether it's because later they're bored and they're finally flipping through it, or because, you know, they're frustrated as they're looking for the part that they love.
Right.
They're going to be exposed to it. But then also, like, I think it is important, like, why do we assume that that's what people are going for? Why? I think it encourages, and even like when people are offended and are talking about their like, you know, their outrage, that's a conversation worth having. And like, I don't know how y'all feel about some of the people who get outraged by your work, but like, to me, I think that that's part of the beauty of what was created, is that that conversation happens, and then they can talk about how their bodies, their vaginas, have been objectified and stigmatized by society, and someone can listen and that conversation can be had, is a great thing.
I'm with you on that. I love all the conversations that it sparked. I mean, I don't think we ever could have anticipated much of anything that happened after we got it out there. You know, like, I'm still learning from that thing.
Yeah.
Like,
So is there going to be a lesbians draw penises?
I want Shannon to answer that. Everyone asked us that.
So, okay, fine. my flip answer is like, well, I'm less interested in seeing penises. I don't want to have to go through 500 penis drawings.
That's your standard answer. That's your standard answer.
Yeah, that's my standard answer. But my more like hoity-toity, I went to grad school answer is that, you know, dicks are everywhere. And they're, you know, like, they're forced in front of my
They've
face.
had enough time.
Yeah, you know,
Play
like,
out.
and
Right.
also, I don't know what it is a whole other conversation, but like, you know, it's like, vagina, bitch, like, deal with it,
Right.
you know, it's like, people are just like, you know,
Yeah.
like, you know, like, I can't look at that, like, like, they fucking freak out about it. So this is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
We've been trying to like promote this project in different forms, in different ways for a while. Like, it's been an exhibit, it's a book, whatever. And we were trying to promote it to get into this one venue, and this gatekeeper person was like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do it because I don't know, the board said it was too vagina-y. So like it's like penis, whatever. Like I see dicks drawn over the bathroom, and they're all in porn, and dicks here and coming in my face and whatever. But it's just like fucking vagina. Deal with that shit.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
What we have been talking about is doing a follow-up that's called What is a Gay Man, What is a Vagina? And just incorporating a lot of the conversations, and maybe including this one, that we've had and some of the reactions, both pro and against sort of this, into a short, concise book.
Yeah. You know, I would be more interested in, like, because actually when I thought of a sequel, like, rather than thinking, completely flipping it to, like, women drawing penises, I was thinking, like, what does it look like when other people draw vaginas? Like, women draw vaginas, lesbians draw vaginas, straight men draw vaginas. Like, how does that narrative of vaginas change?
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
What happens when vaginas draw?
That is a book. That's a book. I want to that book. I think this is the perfect time to open the floor up to questions. If there are any other comments or questions, or anybody else want to participate in the conversation or touch on anything that we've mentioned.
So, since we're talking about bodies and their relationship to artwork, I just wonder how intentional that was for all of you. Like, did you, go into creating your art wanting to put, bodies and embodied experience kind of in the forefront, or was it something that just sort of developed organically and then you noticed it at a certain point, or if you could articulate, like, any, part of that conversation, I guess.
For me, it was intentional, mainly from my personal experience with being ambiguous that I was talking about, and people wanting to categorize me or guess what I am. So I did intentionally create artwork about colorism and cultural identity now, and because I want to spark that dialogue about how we identify is completely different than how you can be perceived. And so for me, it's intentional, and it always has been, just because I have so much, like, inner turmoil, and it really, being biracial is great for art. That's what I mean.
Yeah, sexuality is often part of my work, but recently I had a show as I said, at a space called Women in Their Work, and for me, it's I have a really complicated response to the fact that this is a gallery run by women for women artists, and they're amazing people. It's a great group, and it was started for a very positive reason, which is to give representation to women who are underrepresented often in the commercial art world, and unfortunately it's still relevant. But I have so many issues with it in a way. It's so closed, and I'm like, is this a good thing, or is this a thing to question? And it was just something I thought about so much that my show became more and more about gender and sexuality, and had that been in a different gallery, the show would have been totally different. And I was like, I can't believe more people that do shows here, that there isn't that element in the show. I mean, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So anyway, that's where a lot of the gender and the power and the, all these elements came into what that show was about. And also there's just a lot of people that are naked, and there's a lot of vaginas and dicks and everything in the show, just because I'm thinking about sex a lot. And so, yeah, it was just, came up just because that's where my brain is at these days. But it was just interesting too, because I had some nudity in the show, and I had some of these objects which were sort of these totemic objects, and I loved actually hanging out and sort of incognito at the gallery and watching children deal with that. And what you were saying too about, the kids were immediately like, penis, and then they would be like looking at, there was like I made like a bronze pussy, and like there was another vagina out of wet clay that never dries that was in this nest, and the kids were just totally all, Mommy, what is that? And I was like, wow, amazing, you know? Even female children could identify the penises and not the vaginas. And I was like, oh my God, you know? And just on that note too, talking about bodies and representation and everything, one of my favorite comments from somebody that was seeing the show, I was actually showing it to friends, and this older woman came in and she's like, this is the show that's up? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you the artist? And I was like, mm-hmm. She's like, well, there's a lot of nudity here. And I was like, well, yes, there is, because it was really about the sculptures and the people, and I didn't want them to have a lot of clothes because I felt like clothes would be distracting. And she said, well, the naked body is also just as distracting. And I was like, damn, touche. Shit. So, anyway, that was cool.
That's
She was
quite
like,
a note.
she was like 85 or something, and we were coming in to hate it. Didn't hate it, but like totally threw me some shade. And she was like, pretty great. It was pretty great. Thanks a lot. And like walked out, I was like, wow, man.
Wow.
Yeah, that was awesome. I know, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, it's a fabulous conversation. I mean, it just is a fabulous conversation. As the old man in the room, I have a lot of references that this conversation takes me back to. I remember the first time I saw Barbara Hammer's film Passing the Mirror Around, a circle of women who had never looked at their vaginas, had never looked at other people's vaginas, never knew that they were very different, you know, in size and color and blah, blah, blah. Because we're used to seeing the female image in painting surface. The mystery of the vagina is never, that I can think of, doesn't come to mind, is revealed in the way that this attempts to in the imagination of whoever is drawing it. You know, there's a whole language that men have for their anuses. And mangina is one of them. And anuses, like vaginas, are taboo in most popular culture contexts. And so as a male, I'm thinking about the shaming, the mystery, both of the vagina. I mean, I come from a generation where men really thought there were teeth in there. You know, I would hear old gay men, even today, still talk in a very sexist way about female bodies. Feminist parenting, I think, brought up a generation or two of kids now that knew each other's bodies, even experimented with their bodies. They didn't put any labels on it. But today, language, in many ways, stops us from interacting in the way that the artist can with an audience. Chickaboom's performance last night, you know, I mean, it was, profoundly provocative, you know, and there she was, just like Karen Finley, naked at the beginning, no shame. And for my generation, people, male and female, that's a big step. You guys would probably take off your clothes at a moment. Notice. I mean, and I say that.
Don't speak for me.
I just want to talk about the change and the idea of family and safe and home. We choose our families today. And I didn't hear it, I heard talking around it, but the choice of who I have in my family, intergenerationally, even people I don't agree with, or don't agree with me, we are family and we can talk to each other. And that to me is one of the things that genderqueer and trans people have brought to the conversation by being as adamant about who their self-authorship with, at the same time feeling a need to feel family. And generationally, I think it's really important that we talk honestly and authentically about what this represents, you know, rather than politically correct or gender, you know, just, you know, this is confrontation. Her performance last night was full of that. So I just want to.
I want to open up anyone that would like to comment on that. I before we do that, I want to say there was a comment you made, at the beginning of the comment you made about how women had normally been depicted art historically. And before we open up to comments, I want to say that those depictions of women were made exclusively by men. And so what I think is important to acknowledge is the agency of women and essentially non-cisgendered males to place representations of the body out into the culture, out into art making culture, and how significant and important that is. You know, I think that notion is just one that is important to acknowledge in terms of
But even when women represented nude women in paintings, and there's some we can reference, it still was the male sort of gaze, the way they presented the men.
Right.
Yeah, gosh, dang it, now I don't know what to comment on because, well, I guess really quick, like, even continuing that thought, like, there's, like, when women depict, you know, vaginas in women's bodies, it's seen as differently than when men do it. Like, you know, you talk about Georgia O'Keeffe, or you talk about, like, you know, like, any woman, you know, creating art about vaginas, people are like, oh, like, feminists, and they're like, oh, I don't want to go see that. Like, oh, like, feminist, like, I'm just moving around in my vagina. And like, oh, why did I have to do that? Why does it have to be all about the vagina? Whereas, like, if a man did a show about vaginas, like, a bunch of horny men would go and look at it and talk about it, and no one would say anything like that. And
it's artful.
yeah, it's completely, like, oh, it's such a tasteful nude. And, oh, gosh, I've heard that on stuff that I'm like, no, that's porn. That's porn. So I think that that's an interesting thing to talk about, and so I'm going to actually abandon my other comment that I was going to say. I don't know if anyone...
I just like that. I feel like y'all two could go on for
Yeah, seriously.
listen to it.
Well, actually, okay, so then I'll continue. You also talked about the, you know, the like, women seeing their vaginas for the first time and realizing that they're all different and all that stuff. And we talked earlier about the importance of representation of different bodies in art. And that's exactly, I was trying to, like, search for the words before, and that, I think, sums up why it's so important, not only to show, you know, whether it's different gender bodies, whether it's just different bodies, whether it's different, you know, like, racial bodies, whether it's, like, whatever. Because I think that whenever you don't show it, it's too easy to feel alone. It's too easy for stigma to continue, but specifically internally, like, I know that, like, you can see you see the one representation, you know you're different from that, and because you don't know that we're all different, you just feel so alone and so alien and so disgusting or whatever, and you think, I'm the only one that's like this. And it's not until you see depictions like you, like other people, and you see that there's a giant spectrum, that you understand that you're a piece of the fabric and that you're normal.
Any other final comments or questions? Well, I just want to say thank you. I think this conversation is fucking great, and I want to thank all of you for having the conversation and putting all these ideas forward, and I want to thank Outsider for giving us the space to have this conversation, and yay bodies.
Yay, body.
Yay, bodies.